Howdy y'all, my name is Carson Umbarger and I am the owner and operator of SC Traditions and Traditions Taxidermy Studios. Now this video has to do with the latter half of that business. This is a quick little tutorial on how to preserve a thing that everybody, almost everybody, got their start in hunting with, and that is the squirrel. So how many of y'all have seen the little rat squirrel tails that a lot of times people preserve by just nailing them to a board or, just throwing some simple borax on them and throwing them in a box and letting the borax do its work? I've seen it. I've done it. But I wanted to make a squirrel true to character. Taxidermy is actually Latin for moving skin. A squirrel doesn't have a flat tail. A squirrel has a nice big fluffy tail. That's what makes a squirrel iconic. That's what taunts you in the woods when you're deer hunting and you hadn't seen a deer in 6 months and you still can't find a deer because all you've got is a stupid little squirrel flicking its tail. So what I'm going to show you today in just a few simple steps that anybody can do from home is how to taxidermy a squirrel tail, and just the squirrel tail specifically. Super simple, only borax needed, a hair dryer, a hairbrush, and a little bit of Dawn dish soap. Let's get into it. Now first things first, obviously you're going to have to cut the tail off of the squirrel. And what I do is I just find right about where those really fluffy hairs kind of end, take a pair of scissors and chop it off. Can't show that on YouTube, they're not a big fan of it. Then I'm going to take a pair of pliers and I'm going to grab the stump of that tail and I'm just going to ever so slightly, and also take a knife and just inch away and skin that tail out until eventually those pliers pull that tailbone completely free. That's going to remove the bulk of that meat that's going to rot and stink in your squirrel tail if you don't pull it out. It's not fun. Good taxidermy doesn't smell. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to bring it inside and we're going to take a little bit of degreasing soap. That's your Dawn, your Palmolive, any kind of dish soap is probably going to pull grease out of it. That's just going to pull those natural oils out of that animal so that when it sits and cures, it's not going to have a nasty smell to it and it's not going to look greasy. After that, we're going to bring it up to our table and we're going to blow dry it real good. We got to make sure that all that water is out, because if those hairs are sticking together, you're not going to get your soft squirrel tail that everybody knows and loves. That's the whole point of this video, is to get that nice fluffy tail. And if you don't dry it completely, those hairs are going to set and they're going to set together and it's not going to look good whatsoever. Now what I'm doing periodically while blow drying this thing is I'm taking a soft bristle toothbrush and I'm just going against the grain, which for a squirrel, you're pushing down on the squirrel. Imagine that the rest of the squirrel was still attached. You're pushing towards the butt of the squirrel, towards the body of the squirrel. You're just taking that toothbrush and you're going against the grain, and all you're doing is pulling those hairs apart. And I'm doing that periodically in between the blow drying process. Now one thing I forgot to mention is don't put your hairdryer on high and don't put it on heat. You could worry about heat damaging your squirrel and then you're going to throw away any thought of having that fluffy squirrel tail. Okay, so now that I've done that process, I'm going to take a thin gauge wire, probably somewhere between a 12 to 16 gauge wire, something that's going to mimic the bone of that tail. And I'm just going to push it through where that bone would go and I'm going to push it out the top end. That's important for later, I'll tell you. Now, just like the traditional method, you're going to take a little bit of borax. Borax is a preservative, and I'm going to take that wire out, and I'm going to push that borax down. I've got the opposite end of a paintbrush that I just eased it down the thick part of the squirrel. You can also use your wire, which is what you're going to have to use when you're trying to get to the top. And this is when poking that hole in the top of the squirrel comes in handy. You're going to run that wire all the way through and kind of just beat it back and forth lightly. You don't want to tear the skin, but you want to work that borax all the way through the tail. That's just going to dry up any of that moisture on the inside of the squirrel tail and cure the tail. Now we're going to leave the wire in permanently and we're going to stick it in a box of some kind, or whatever you've got, a foam block, something that's going to hold that tail upright. And this is your last chance to set any of those hairs on that squirrel. So take that paintbrush, take your hand, run it against the grain, do anything you're going to do to make sure those hairs are exactly laying the way you want them to. And here we go. This is what we're left with, a squirrel tail sticking out of a box. And we're gonna leave it like this for about 2 weeks. I know it seems like a really long time, but we want that skin to set. We want that borax to do exactly what it's gonna do. If you don't wait that long, you're gonna end up with some misplaced hairs. It's just not gonna look right. Taxidermy takes time. That's the biggest lesson that I've learned with this is you cannot rush anything with the process. We're gonna leave it like this though, like I said, for about 2 weeks. Then we're gonna come along and either clip that wire off if we can't remove it for whatever reason, or a lot of times you can just pull the squirrel tail off, the wire will come out, and it's good to go, y'all. And that is how you make the perfect squirrel tail. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. Squirrel tails are a perfect way to preserve those outdoor memories for anybody who's getting into the outdoors or for a seasoned outdoorsman. For those of y'all that don't want to go through this process and live in the South Carolina area yourselves, hit me up. I'm going to flash my email up here. I'm also going to put it down in the description. I'll do these squirrel tails for you for about $5 a piece. Great way to preserve those outdoor memories, like I said. And I will see y'all next time, y'all. Y'all are the best.